you fed up with internet that sucks? Aussie Broadband have over 1,500 five-star reviews.
Yeah, again.
I never thought I'd love it.
These guys are putting a big telco to
People, have we not?
Straight up,
I'm Josh's
no crap.
Yeah.
With all Australian
I've seen them at every patch. So
and unlimited NBN plans from $69 a month. You can find out what you've been missing out
I
on.
work at Quadro
Plus,
sometimes.
sign up now and get your first month free on any NBN plan. Aussie Broadband. Can't beat feedback.
Can I get them?
Sorry, am I getting in the...
That's fine.
Okay.
Yeah, let's do that.
Ooh, that was not the slide I was expecting. And have we got the one with the title for the panel?
I can give you a title.
That's okay. I'll improvise. Good morning, PAX attendees. 3 days, Saturday, Sunday, all of that. Welcome to Galah Theatre. There's water up the back. If you need to get out the door, let me know. I'll open it. It's heavy. It's heavier than it looks. Welcome to Saturday morning's 10:30 panel. Oh, here we go. Developing developments in accessibility and develop. That's 2 developers. That's 3 developers.
All the development.
Develop! I present you develop. Okay, let's go.
So I nearly got the yellow right. Okay. Yeah, I'd just like to start by acknowledging that we're gathered today on what always was and always will be Aboriginal land. It was sovereignty was never ceded. I would like to pay my respects to the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation and their elders past, present and emerging, and extend those same respects to any other First Nations peoples that we have with us here today. It is great to have you all here at this bright and early, possibly inaccessible time frame, zone. My name is Giselle Rosman. I have an interest in accessibility just generally and like to be able to give it a voice. So I keep running these panels because I keep wanting to give it a voice. But I don't know lots about these things, and aside from, I guess, what some people would consider minor, but you know, we all have accessibility issues, particularly as we get older. My interest is getting more and more as I find it harder to read the font. I would like to introduce my very clever, I'm actually going to make them introduce themselves, panel. So if you can let me know who you are and how do you spend your time?
Sure. So I'm Nita O'Neill. I've been a contributor for PC Powerplay magazine for like 12 years or something like that. A long time. And I'm certainly interested in accessibility. I have sort of come at it from 2 angles, and one is that I really love kind of the old school hardcore kind of games, and a lot of people are doing a lot of things to make them more accessible nowadays, which is great. And I'm certainly very interested in welcoming everyone to gaming, rather than keeping it as kind of a closed off pursuit. And I also meet a lot of independent game designers. So last year at PAX, I think I saw like 150 indie games, which was cool. My son and I are on 61. We saw 61 yesterday, and we're hoping to see a whole bunch more today. And I honestly have never met an indie designer who wanted to exclude people from their game. Indie designers want to include as many people as possible. So I'm hoping that if there are people in the audience with experiences to share about how to make games better for them, that I can help pass it on and spread the word to all the people that I see as I kind of go around. Yeah.
I'm David Giles. I've been making games for about 25 years, mainly in Melbourne. I had a 2-year stint at Santa Monica, working on God of War. So for me, it's evolving. Accessibility in games is evolving, and it's getting much, much better. So there's a few things that I want to talk about in regard to that. Also in regard to Microsoft that we're working with at the moment, because they're sort of like making big changes in regard to lots of sort of areas in that. But I'm also, accessibility is also affecting me now, because I have to get my young son to do the bosses. I can't do them anymore, so I need the story mode. I'm doing that in Assassin's Creed at the moment, where I have to sort of like switch over to the more accessible for me now. I just panic and can't do it anymore. So it is sort of slightly affecting me as well as I play.
Hi, my name is Grace Hester. I am a games journalist with Go2 Game. I've only sort of very recently started this sort of career path, and I've also only within the last several years become disabled myself. I was like an able-bodied person and thought games, you know, or hardcore games and stuff like that had all these crazy rules that were not accessible, were like really cool and cool design things, and then I became disabled and I was opened up to this entire world of that's not actually super cool, this kind of sucks. So now I've sort of become really fascinated with the world of accessibility and exploring that in games and how to get more games to more people, because everyone should be able to have a good time.
I'm Josh. I wheelchair disability, and I do YouTube and play a few different games that I find sometimes I struggle to play due to some of the hardware problems. Yeah, I like playing computer games. So yeah.
Well, thank you very much all for being here, and it's nice to have you up on the stage, Josh, because I've been watching you down in the audience for several years now. So it's excellent to be able to have you with us all. Now, Grace, you said to me when we were discussing the panel that last year God of War was your game of the year.
Yes.
You might be a bit like, it's only David, he's fine. You might fangirl a little bit.
I'm just going to say, I didn't write that thing in the PAX notes. I just didn't. And so
I wrote it.
And it's really embarrassing. All that sort of stuff. So I apologise up front. It wasn't me.
And you did tell me that when your children read it, and I called you Dad of War, they said, don't you mean Granddad of War?
It never stops.
Yeah.
All right, I'm quiet.
So, what was it about the game that made it your game of the year, and how did that relate? Did it relate to the accessibility implications?
I mean, initially, the accessibility was sort of secondary to me because the game itself was this amazing sort of complete 180 on the God of War series, which was traditionally sort of, misogynistic, sort of incredibly macho series, and it sort of turned that on its head and looked at how that can actually be incredibly detrimental to having a regular life and having a family and having to cope with things like that, and this sort of exploration of Kratos as he develops into a dad instead of this huge dick. So that was really interesting to me, and then sort of midway through the game I started realizing more and more, like, it started with the QuickTime events. I sort of began to think, I can't keep doing these, it's sort of killing my hands. And then I went, well, what accessibility options are there? So I went in and there was this massive list of so many things, and I could just like make the QuickTime events just a single button press, and a patch later on made it so I could change the size of the subtitles, and I could just do so many cool things. And so overall, like, all of these elements of the game came together and made me go, this is a good video game. I think this one's my favourite one of the year. What a good video game.
Nice. And so, David, you are producer. I'm going to say, you need to give me the official title or I'll get in trouble. So, what was your
Senior Managing Producer.
Brackets.
For 2 years.
For 2 years. And has also been chatting with all of the team back there and hassling them.
Oh yeah, no, this morning Giselle sent a list of questions at 3 in the morning.
Yeah, I sent them at 11, just because you didn't get them until 3.
3 in the morning. And so I said, I don't know the answer to this. And so I contacted Santa Monica and I said, oh look, I've been asked these solid curly questions. And so they sent me a deck on accessibility, a post-mortem, which you're not allowed to see because it's very, very nuts and bolts. It's sort of embarrassing in certain areas, which so he said, oh, David, you can read this, that's fine, but just don't put it on the screen. So, but that was all at 3 o'clock, and so in 45 minutes I got the information I needed from them, which was good.
But, and you were saying like that was being a post-mortem on how they've gone. It is quite brutal and real, and it's like, this is legitimate.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, we really got this wrong, and this
Yes,
is...
how do we do better?
Yeah, so it's fantastic that those conversations are happening and in such big studios.
Yeah.
What... I'm just going to be up and down all day. You only chill vocals like you.
Accessible.
What goes into making a game more accessible? And like we've got, you know, was there any particular challenge that title had?
Well, yes. I mean, it's always going to be that thing because, and I can't play God of War particularly well. Just be upfront. I'm just not. My Twitch skills are just sort of gone now. They were never there to start with. To be honest, I'm a sniper. I camp. I'm a long, long way away. I wait for the enemy to come. I'm not in their face. I play Wolfenstein. In Wolfenstein, they close the door behind you every now and again, and I can't get further backwards. And so they're all in my face doing this. And I said, I was happy to snipe you for over 4 hours. What are you doing in my face? And so there's a certain point with boss fights where I have to hand it off. So with God of War, there were a number of things that needed to be sort of considered. But the main thing I think that they did right from the get-go is they had an accessibility screen, as you said, and that was really important. And that's important for all developers, that in your UI you have an empty spot that says accessibility. And as soon as you've got an empty spot that says accessibility, you have to put things there. And you have to work out exactly what you're going to do. And it means there's a conversation from the get-go. Because lots of developers, myself included, is you get right to the end of the project and you're just trying to finish it. You're just trying to make this game, and it's really complicated and stressful and difficult, and you're doing brand new things, and they say, well, what about your accessibility then? And you haven't even got it to work with anyone at that point. Like it's just a mess. And so that becomes an afterthought, and it needs to be a thought right from the very start. So what I should say as well, as far as God of War goes, this is not normal development, okay? God of War is not what you would see most of the time. I don't want to give it a price tag on how much it costs, but it's more than you could ever imagine in your life. I mean, truly, it was a huge budget. I mean, it's in a studio that has 6 kitchens, for God's sake. Okay, so it's got 6 kitchens. I was the art manager. I looked after 130 artists and the outsourced studios. Okay, so this is not your normal run-of-the-mill thing. So I'm prefacing this. So there are takeaways from how they approached it, which you can, people can use all the time. And one of them, which is really, really important, is focus testing. Focus testing, you get the end user of all different shapes and sizes to try it. Is this enjoyable? Now for Santa Monica, just to let you know, it's sort of like NASA in as much as they've got these 2 giant rooms, which are the focus test rooms. And one is for the game player to play it, and there's all these pods set up everywhere. There's a camera on them, there's a camera on their hands, there's a feed going from the game, and then there's another room where everyone's watching, so all the designers, the lead designers are in there, Corey's in there, they're watching the gameplay happen. So they're just watching people play through the game. And they do this all the time, like every 3 or 4 weeks they would have another focus test where they get new people in and they would try it. They get heat maps in the game, and the heat maps, when it's red, the person is stuck. And if the person is stuck, and if there's a lot of red in the game, it goes back to the design department and they fix it. So it's a thing about, this cannot stay in the game. This is a point of frustration. And I know they did this for people with disabilities as well. It was a thing where, as the game is being controlled, are there bits where players are getting stuck? So the focus testing was really important, because lots of developers, they're so close to the product and they're so good at it that they can't consider. I mean, the old story is that the quality assurance have played the game for so long that they find it boring and they want the challenge to be upped. So 1 million years ago, I worked on a game called KKD, which was sort of an RTS, like truly before you were born, probably. And what it was is, so I was a producer on that, and the QA department would speed run it all the time. They would in a blink, they would have got through the level. And so they said, this is too simple, this game is way too simple. So we said, all right, we better fix that. They're QA, they're our test department, we've got to fix this. And so we made it harder and harder, especially the end levels. until we found out when it actually went out there into the market before the days of patching, that it was almost impossible to finish because it was so hard unless you played it for a year. Every day for a year. If you played it every day for a year, you'd get through the end level, but if you weren't one of the robots that were in QA that were just sort of powering through this thing, so that's a thing where you need fresh eyes on your product. And so Santa Monica absolutely did that. They took that very seriously. They also brought in consultants. And this is where I didn't want to lie. This is where I need to get information from Santa Monica last night. But Josh Stroud, who has the ratings, the disability in games and how accessible they are to players with disabilities, he was brought on pretty early, and I know that he upset the team. Okay, so they said, have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? Have you thought about this? And the UI team and the designers hadn't thought about it as much as they should. And so when you've got things like the chisel door puzzle, which need to be reduced to a single button press, then all of that sort of stuff happened after he came on board and was able to do that. Is that enough?
Yeah, I think so. You've done well.
Shot.
Done well. Let me figure out where I was at. I was just listening. It's interesting as to when you think about it. Like, as you can see, we've got the ramp for Josh today, and I mean that's great. We've got it because we've asked for it, but it's certainly not the default setting of a PAX panel, which is something. And we will, when we throw to call to questions and comments, we want to hear from you. Later we will have a roaming mic, but once again, that's not the default setting here at PAX. They've gone, oh, because you're an accessibility panel, we will have a roaming mic. Which is nothing to pick on the people here, it's processes that need to be thought about from the ground up. Why isn't it just a roaming mic by default, so you don't have to go, actually I've got mobility issues, can I talk too? So yeah, that was just something that came up and I'm totally going to do as an aside. And then segue terribly into Megan's area of interest.
Cool.
Super hard games.
Sort of. I guess sort of the examples I've prepared have been games that I've recently reviewed and kind of looked at PC Power Play. In terms of, I've been a games reviewer long enough to remember the phrase dumbing down games, which was kind of a condescending or a way to look at the idea that if something was accessible, it was easier. And I don't think that necessarily needs to be true because, challenge is one of the things we all love about games. I don't think there's any kind of barrier to that necessarily. But I guess what I've seen in recent years in the indie section is people doing difficulty in different ways. So people actually approaching different ways to make the game kind of more or less, I suppose, instead of more or less difficult, more or less appropriate to their own context. So, for example, I recently reviewed Jump Grid by Ian McClarty, which is kind of an arcade game, and you have to kind of jump around like a 9-square kind of a thing, collecting the cubes and then disappear through the middle portal. And I was playing it for quite a while, and it's a difficult game, and I went to the options and I realised you can actually drop the speed of the game by any increment from 100 down to 0. So you can play at 100 speed or 99 speed or all the way down. And I still found I was enjoying the challenge at different kind of levels. This could be useful for people who have trouble manipulating the controls and such like that. It's kind of a control button game, this particular one. Other examples that I've noticed recently, in Anodyne 2, for example, there's sort of a lot of action combat, but you can make yourself invincible if you like. So instead of actually kind of playing a story mode or the enemies being squishier or you being more powerful or whatever like that, you can kind of play the battle how it was designed, but you can be invincible or you can have double health. So just, I guess, alternatives to these kinds of things. I really like the idea that people are building systems from the ground up. I guess my own experience with some other features has been taking what has existed and kind of working backwards. For example, I've written a couple of hint guides for games in recent years, including a guide for Thimbleweed Park, which was a very faithful classic adventure game, and I really like that kind of faithful experience. But I guess the hint guide, which I wrote in Twine, was originally intended to fill in some gaps, sort of for people who were not very familiar with adventure game mechanics, those kinds of things. But yeah, so I guess there's a bit of a combination of working with what we already have to make it more accessible, and then kind of working with things with the ground up, from the ground up. And as I mentioned before, I've never met an indie designer who wants to actually exclude someone from their games. So I'm really interested during the question times and things, if there's anything that you feel that is sort of some input that you have about your own experiences with games, which I can take around with me to the 150 games here at PAX. I really enjoy having these conversations with designers as we kind of go around.
Yeah, excellent.
So yeah.
You've even got the media on your side. That's awesome. Josh, I know when we met earlier, you mentioned that we are talking probably fairly software heavy at the moment in terms of how we can make the games more accessible. And you just went, well, that's all well and good, and how about your hands? So I've got small hands.
Yeah.
So there are obviously hardware issues. What are the hardest things for you to play your game?
For me is not just like the keyboard and mouse. The mouses are designed bigger, bulkier mouses, which for small hand users isn't quite practical. I found a couple of mouses down there at the hall that are quite nice, quite small, stuff like that. Xbox, some of the games, the steering wheel, you can get like racing car steering wheels. Their default buttons on games that allow you to change the buttons. They can't use the keyboard mode. The other option they have is the flappy paddles, which they're too short.
Yeah.
And the games don't allow you to change that's where it kind
Yeah,
of...
the remapping. So
Yeah.
That's a software thing.
That's a software and a hardware thing.
Yeah.
Because they don't put the hardware, they only give you two options in the software to match the hardware, and they go, none of them work.
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem I find, that sometimes the hardware and the software developers in the games don't talk to one another.
Yeah.
They give them, these are the two options, that's it, or a few options, and you go, none of them for people with small hands work.
Yeah, interesting. And now you're back in Melbourne, David. We sort of touched on this a little bit with the Microsoft stuff. So you're working on the remaster of Age of Empires?
The definitive edition.
Definitive edition, yeah, I was just making up words again.
That's right.
Of Age of Empires. And like with Microsoft has been putting a lot of effort into accessibility. How many accessibility bugs have you got on your list at the moment, David?
So, at the moment, we've got, we've done the Steam version of 1, we're trying to finish 2, we've got Age 3, and we're assisting with Age 4, and with 1 and 2, I think there are over 100 accessibility bugs at the moment, and the thing that's really, really good, here's a really good thing which is upsetting me enormously, but it is really, really good, is that we have to go through cert to get this out to you guys. And normally cert is, if you pull a LAN cable out of the back of your PC, it elegantly falls over. It sort of says, I'm disconnected, I can't cope. And it tells the player that if you save to the cloud, it works out where the most recent save is. All of those sorts of things, which are all sort of like cert things, and that's for console development as well as PC development. And so there are all these sorts of things which we have to go through on Xbox, with XRs, and on Sony's TRCs, and so we have to abide by this. And unless you fill out all of these things, they won't allow your product out there. Now there's an accessibility cert, and we have to pass the accessibility cert. And this is another department that's not connected to the main accessibility cert, and they will knock your product back. So if they say this is not readable, if this doesn't pass the photosensitivity test, and they run that third-party test, and they will put the game through it, and if there are sort of colours that sort of clash and it doesn't do the right thing, or it's sort of like things are moving too quickly, or the contrast is wrong, they'll say, fix your UI. Not going to be allowed to be released until you've done that. And so we've inherited some UIs because they're old, and so we've reworked them, and all of them fail. Just across the board, they're just a shambling mess. And I don't know whether any of you have actually dealt with trying to build UIs. It's a monstrous, buggy, terrible, terrible thing. And this is a thing where we also have to work out that we're doing this right as far as accessibility. The hardest thing for us is that they send it off to this third party, and they run the software on it and it fails, and they say this is where it fails, but we can't run it again. We don't have the software. They just say this is where it's broken, and we have to fix it, and then we have to give it back to them and they run the test again. So that's a little bit of backwards and forwards. There's obviously some sort of monetary thing there, but the good thing is that they are insisting on this, and Microsoft is insisting on this, and I know that Sony's really on board and Microsoft really on board. They want to reach as many people as they can, and now that there is a thing where games generally, maybe not so much for Age of Empires, but for other games where there is a really, really strong narrative, I know that I play games because I like the stories now. I want to be emotionally involved in them. I mean, I'm more than happy to shoot super mutants endlessly, but I want to be engaged. I want to feel something about the things that I'm shooting. It's terrible, but it's definitely a thing where I don't want to be stuck. I don't want to get to a point where through bad design or shit game, being a shit player, I can't move forward. I want to be able to sort of go into that story mode and move forward, and maybe then demonstrate to myself how rubbish I am by upping the level of difficulty again or moving from story mode. But all I know is that within the game development community, this is being, looked at more and more than it ever used to be when I started in the industry.
And so that's at the moment for kind of like studios working very closely with Microsoft.
Yeah, at the moment it's very close.
But potentially that means, like that's almost like a soft launch for, one day it'll be all of us need to meet all of this compliance to be launched on Xbox. So, the power of that is just amazing to have such a big company sort of backing that.
And I think if you are developing in your UI, have an accessibility screen. That's all you need to do to start with, because you have to put something in
and
there.
then you'll see it's all empty.
Yeah, you'll say,
look at the options.
what have I done? What have I done? I need to have some sliders in here, I need to have some buttons. What do they do? And as soon as you start thinking about it, then you become, oh my God, yes, all of this stuff. I can do this thing. I can do a thing where I can make the enemy's hit points slightly less. So therefore, I've done story mode. It's really easy. I could do that. I can put it on the accessibility screen. It's good, and it's not. But it's not enough at all. It's not that thing about you've finished everything.
Megan's first in with questions.
Oh, sorry.
As usual, sorry.
That's good. That's good. You can ask questions.
When you were talking about that, I was just fascinated to know, can you give us some examples of what has been flagged as an accessibility bug? Can you give us any examples?
Make me cough. It's anxiety coughing. So all right. So the bulk of them are this is too small. This is just the bulk of them are. This is not readable. It's not. It's not. So lots of them. So the bulk of them, to be honest with you, the bulk of them, especially for Age of Empires, is in a UI that's not functioning as it should. And so what we did for with Age 1, we all we did was the Steam version, but they wanted us to fix some things as well. So it's that thing about, it's really simple. We just want you to do this really, really simple thing, but we also want to make it cross-play between Xbox Live and Steam. So just do that for us. And we also want to do an entirely new network layer using Relic Link. Just do that as well. So it's just this sort of like death by 1,000 cuts. But it was a thing where we had this UI that was built by another team, and the accessibility pass came back and said the font's too small. It's incomprehensible to most players. So we upped the font as best we could within the screens, and it went out. And one of the first reviews that came back said, "God, this font is ugly." So we said, "Oh." We didn't quite know where to go from there. But at the moment, the hundreds and hundreds are mainly to do with that. And it's to do with the colours of the panels as well. So we've got, because Age of Empires, especially for the early ones, are an experiment in brown. They're just like endless wood panelling everywhere. It's sort of antique-y world. Is that they've got sort of fawns and other browns sort of really, really close to each other, and they flick backwards and forwards. And it's upsetting to me.
Okay, nice one.
Yeah, do. I want you to ask that one.
So this is the interviewer and me asking a million questions of everybody. So for Josh and Grace, mentioned that dexterity and those types of things could be a barrier to play. Are there examples of games that you can't play, and can you think of sort of solutions to fix them, if we can kind of pass them on and kind of spread the word for you?
I actually played a game. This is more of an example of how this is done really well. I recently played Cadence of Hyrule on Switch, which is a spin-off of Crypt of the Necrodancer. And basically, it's a rhythm game, and you have to move your character to the beat, which is super good in theory if you've got an ear for music, or you know, if you can move the character and you can think as fast as the music goes, which in some cases can sort of ramp up there, like with bosses and such. But there is an option to turn this feature off entirely, which almost completely changes the genre of the game into this strategy game where the world only moves when you do. So if you you can sit there for 10 minutes plotting out your next move, and the enemies will only move, the world will only move when you press that button to like begin your strategy and begin what you've thought about.
There's only a few games most of the games I play on PC, and it's the games I play, I find them because I'm able to play them. Minecraft for me is quite well. I can change keys whenever I want to. Some of the console, like Xbox, I like the current Xbox control, but when I want to do car racing games and stuff like that, I want to be able to have this feel of the steering wheel. I can never drive in a car, and that's when I had the problem. But I could theoretically go and plug the Xbox control back in and do it that way. But yeah, so the console games, I find most of them I have no problem until I want to do a variation of it. PC games, I have no trouble typically because the keys are pretty simple, and most of the games I play, you can kind of change them. I just have some troubles, and it's mostly for me, some of the hardware, I just gotta find the hardware that I need. They're not that common.
Yeah, that's right, and then it adds to the expenses in what no doubt is already quite an expensive life.
Yeah.
Yeah, they sounded like really interesting examples, and I love what you were saying about how it changed the actual genre. And I guess that's what I've been finding with the indie games taking kind of creative solutions to these things. And I was just going to add in the hardware space, just a really sad story I heard a few years ago was a gamer that I was having a chat with who was playing The Witcher, and he loved The Witcher, and it was click to move, and he was playing with a mouth controller. So he actually, just the one button kind of scheme worked really well for him in that particular sense. But then by the time The Witcher 2 came out, it was WASD control scheme, and he was actually unable to play it at all. So the fact that, I mean, it seems just very sad that was his kind of favourite series, but because of the change of control scheme halfway through, that he wasn't able to play the rest. I don't know whether we kind of need to be able to expect, perhaps this is a question for David, can we kind of expect larger AAA series to have a consistent kind of method of...
Yeah, so I guess there's a sort of a language that people expect from the games. So we're beyond now reinventing the wheel in one way where people are expecting this to do this, and if you click this button it will do this. However, there's no reason why you can't have endless remapping and to consider that. And so I guess it's to do with just fitting that into the development cycle, where you can sort of say, let's map these keys together so you don't press both at the same time. It's not a difficult thing to do. I mean, I'm guilty of developing probably the most inaccessible version of a game. I don't know whether you've seen Stellaris on the console. So Stellaris by its very nature it's just. So the problem with that is that every button on the controller, because it's a PC strategy game for it, it's already the keyboard. Every key is mapped on the keyboard, and it's already like this flight sim thing that you've got where everyone's got shortcuts everywhere, and we've got this controller on the the Xbox and PlayStation 4, and it's a thing where to remap that into sort of we've run out of keys, we've run out of buttons at that point, and as clever as we'd like to be, this button, if you do this, has actually 3 different functions, that sort of stuff, and so it's this spaghetti of control, and so that just by its very nature is a really difficult thing to hop in. So not a good example.
That reminds me of a probably poorer example, but me and my kids play Overwatch, and we usually play on PlayStation. And I got an Xbox, and it was like, oh, it's free Overwatch weekend, and my eldest is a wicked Ana, like flat Ana, and also an amazing Mercy, and could not physically do what could be done on the PlayStation controller just because the Xbox One's that bit fatter.
So she was hardwired at that point.
No, well, it's like I can't. Yeah, it's like I'm remapping everything to where I can, and that's not even with any physical accessibility. That's just I have 15-year-old girl hands. And it was like, oh no, this is too fat and clunky. And yes, it would take some practice, but it was just like, and I always find it with that control, which I find interesting given how much focus there is. Where I'm like, oh, I really prefer to play the controller. Yeah. So here you go. We've got, what other challenges? We've got a lot of challenges coming up, particularly like, I guess with the growth, slow growth of VR.
Yeah, VR.
Yeah, I think it was probably 2 years ago in the accessibility panel, someone went, so VR, and my mind just hurt so much thinking about it. Like they're still trying to figure out how to do subtitles in that space really well. Like no one's nailed it yet. There are some better examples.
Having the movement in VR.
And yeah, that's all of a sudden there's more of an assumption.
Because a lot of them you've got to walk around in a tight area.
And how you manage that.
You can't.
That's right. But
we just can't do sideways, side to side. You only go forward and backwards easily. You can't look where you are. Some of the games I tried last year, a downhill luge, no problem, because that really all you do is move your body. The walking around games, their disability cannot really be for wheelchairs.
That's right. So there's all these really new problems that are quick, but at least we've already hit that point where we're thinking a bit about accessibility. I was talking to an Unreal evangelist yesterday who was saying, yes, VR, I'm trying to figure out how to make VR work for a double amputee with no mobility, like a hand amputee with no mobility. And that's honestly a problem that he's looking at and trying to think about and how to solve. So, you know, we are sort of, if we can keep trying to focus some resources on that, because it's not a cheap thing, like game development is a cheap thing overall, and as soon as there's more things. But the fact that we're looking at it earlier on is fantastic. I ran a train jam, the most inaccessible game jam I've ever run. And you walk in with all of the gear you need for all of Games Week, 15 minutes in Sydney, so I did feel a bit bad about that. But I also had one of the developers who's been making games for many years, and it was his first jam. He started with accessibility. He's like, I'm going to make an accessible game. That's what I've decided, and it was a text-based poetry game. But it began with, okay, so screen readers and text sizes and dyslexic font, and these are all the priorities that I'm beginning with. So that was really cool too. I enjoyed that.
I'm sort of curious as far as VR goes, and this is not to do with accessibility, but this is to do with how many people are going to sit on their lounge suite with a bucket on their head, really, at the end of the day. If they've got family around and they've got the goggles on and they're completely immersed.
Does anyone here, hands up if you have a VR headset? It's really interesting to see that. That's more than I was part of anticipating. Yeah, and hands up who uses it more than once a week. Okay, yeah, cool. Because that's it. I mean, step one there is to get rid of the wires, and so Oculus has got there. But yeah, it's because I'm not pulling apart my lounge room every day. Just to have a bit of a sit.
No, that's good. I'm.
You're surprised.
Well, yeah, I am surprised. I was becoming more and more cynical by the second. I'm pleased.
Where's the page gone? Here it is. Okay, so yes, I think, see how we're going for time. I might throw open, are you feeling the questions and the comments, team? Yes, all this one, yes, excellent.
Come outside, they've had time to think of questions.
Excellent, wonderful. Well, we'll have a roaming mic. If you are interested in asking any of us anything, or just want to let us know your experience, let us know. We'll start over here. Feel free to put your hands down, and then I'll do my best to keep an eye out.
I noticed that a lot of the discussion today has been around, obviously, sort of more amputee mobility, despite visual impairment. I'm actually legally blind and was a huge Microsoft fan, so I lost my eyesight. Is there anything in the development works or anything that you guys are aware of that they're doing for those that can't see anymore but would still like to game?
From my perspective, there is lots of conversation about, especially for new titles, about really clear audio sort of guidance, and that's not only sort of like text to speech, but also within the game, that the environment really clearly is sort of like, you know, explains where you are. The Microsoft people we work with in Seattle, they always talk about, I can't remember the game now, but it was a fighting game, and they said that they had one person who was really good, and he was blind, and he would just play the fighting game with audio cues, and they just sort of say, so don't forget about these players as well, because if you do that well enough, there's a good gameplay experience to be had with that too. Obviously, it is complicated and a difficult thing. Yeah, they talk about it.
I just add, I was speaking on an audio panel yesterday where there was a visually impaired woman who mentioned that certain games with audio cues again made a big difference to her. And in the indie section over the past couple of years, I've seen a couple of really specific games for that have been developed for a blind audience. There's two that come to mind over the past 2 years, and their names are not coming to my head just at the
I
moment.
know one of them is Lost and Hound.
Was it?
Lost and Hound sort of debuted in the Diversity Lounge, I think, maybe not last year, but the year before. And the entire idea behind the game is you play as a dog, and the game is built entirely around using sound cues to locate missing people and it's essentially just, you can play the game even as an able-bodied person. You can close your eyes and play the game and still be perfectly capable of playing.
They're probably worse at it than you.
Yeah, exactly. Probably worse at it than someone who actually is visually impaired.
And there was also Beyond Eyes was another game which I reviewed at one point, and there's partly no visuals, and then at other times there are visual elements. But I think you're chasing a cat.
Yeah.
You're finding your cat through a range of different kind of challenges.
Yeah, and you play as a visually impaired character, which is why the world is the way it is.
Yeah.
What was that?
Beyond Eyes. I can't remember the developer's name, but yeah.
Oh, they can't, unfortunately.
Yeah.
We can Google it.
It's on Steam though and everything, so
Yeah.
it should be findable.
Okay.
I'll run where you point.
Yeah, okay, we'll go there. Oh wait, actually, yeah. I've said it now, I'm doing it firstly, and then we'll go along this way. Yeah.
Megan mentioned earlier about the story about the player who had issues with The Witcher transitioning to the second one. Obviously, because the sophistication of games is going to grow exponentially to technological advancement, it's all good and well to focus on what we can manage through the UI. But specifically for Grace and Joshua, what has been your experience when you've gone out there and looking for things that bridge the gap for the physical components such as peripherals that might be more customized and tailor-made to your circumstances?
I'm not someone who personally needs peripheral. Mostly it's a personal preference thing. My disability more lies, I have Crohn's disease. I don't know if anyone here has that, but basically it affects how long I can play a game, and when I need to put a game down, I need to put it down right there and then and run, which means Dark Souls, impossible, because the pause screen still goes, you know, like you could still die on a pause screen. And I remember one particular story, I don't know if you've ever heard of this game, Zombie U, for the Wii U back when it was first released. And one of the big features, they touted this as this massive cool feature, is that you could bring the map up and you could bring all this stuff up, and while you were looking at the map, the game would still go and you could still die. And at the time I thought, wow, what? That's so cool, that's so immersive. And then I became in a situation where that was not ideal, and I suddenly realized, this sucks. Why don't games just have solid pause, ways to pause?
Yeah, I was the producer on that console.
Never mind, you're not my friend anymore. You suck.
He's learning.
I don't mean that, I love you.
As a parent, I
Yes.
also don't like that.
As a parent,
Yeah.
I like a pause button to work too.
It was to make you frightened. It was supposed to be frightening.
Yeah, exactly.
It was supposed to be frightened all the time.
That's why it sounded really cool, and then it wasn't.
You'll have to, yes. Did a great job now.
Hi everybody. So I've been working in the game development world for the past 4 years now, and something that's become very apparent is that there are more and more advocates for accessibility, which I think is fantastic, and panels like this are brilliant for this, so thank you all for running something like this. But I found that with the games that have been developed within my company, it is much easier to take into account accessibility issues before development starts. Once a game has shipped, it is so much harder to retroactively add features in. But trying to justify features to shareholders or stakeholders can be quite difficult without, positive KPI. Can we prove that the players are out there? Are there any tools that someone like myself can take to these people and say, the players are out there, because they are?
I think the first question is, this is sort of tangential, but why do we need to prove the players are out there? In numerical terms, in terms of we need to be welcoming everyone. But that's just kind of like a semantic kind of a point. But Harris, just asking.
Well, so I think it's that thing justifying it to the person with the money. And that's the sort of thing. This will be an extra 2 months of development time.
Subtitles are easy because 60% of people use it regardless of their visibility.
We actually recently in our QA department hired a person who is deaf, and they have been an absolute wonder for subtitles, including sounds that aren't just dialogue. So even inaudible sounds like birds chirping, things that anything with context, we now include in our subtitles, which is fantastic.
So strangely enough, the PC development is slightly different. Console development, there are different. There's a code of conduct that you have to, there are things you've got to pass to be able to get it out there. It's good if you can sort of wave a piece of paper and sort of say, we need to comply with these things. We have to, this is sort of like, it needs to have a use by date. It needs to have all of these sorts of things. So we need, that is probably the thing where we need to get to, and it's for developers as well, because like I said, developers are struggling just to finish, and so they need to have a thing which they think about right from the very start, and they say, we need to consider all of these things. It's just a screen, you've got all of these screens in the UI, this is just a screen, but this is what we need to comply with. And so there are definitely websites around which will sort of say, think about all of these sections.
Just to add as well, as a game fan and a game journalist, firstly, social media is really good, because if something goes wrong in an accessible game, and even one person might tweet about it and say, this feature kind of sucked, and then that tweet might, generate this massive discussion. But also, as a journalist, I will personally tear your game to pieces if it's not accessible in certain ways. So, one example that I know caused a massive uproar, and because it was such a stupid decision, is Spyro Reignited trilogy didn't implement subtitles until 6 months after launch. And that generated such a massive discussion that I'm sure the people who wanted to put subtitles in the first place are just looking at the higher ups going, I told you this day one, and so.
That's an accounting decision.
Oh, okay.
That's an accounting decision. It sort of said, you've got this much time to do this new version. What do you need the time to do? And it just they just don't.
But I think that's a point. As social media becomes bigger, and people can directly talk to developers and directly talk to each other.
I would also recommend with those sort of things, social media is good and bad.
And bad and terrible.
It's hard as a game dev on social media a lot of the time. Get in touch with them. They're actually going to listen to you more if you bother to email them directly than if you're going to complain on Twitter.
We'll be slightly startled.
We'll be surprised. We're surprised. We don't get it on letters.
Yeah, we don't talk to people.
So, but getting in touch and saying, this has been my experience with this game, and this is what I would like to see, and respecting that making games is hard and takes a long time. Yeah. And some people are, sometimes it's just they're oblivious, and so it's a learning curve, and a lot of the time it's probably financial, particularly for indies who are going to try and cover everything they can, but are restricted by running.
Yeah, I should
everything.
make it clear, like when I say tear your game apart, I mean in the nicest possible, like literally, I really don't like upsetting devs because I know how hard they work. So
Critically
I'll just
constructive way,
say,
yeah.
this feature sucks, but like in really nice words.
We can read the subtext, it's alright.
Yeah. So yeah, okay, yes.
Hi, sorry, I've got a few different comments to make after hearing a few different things. My name's Sally, I'm a secondary school teacher. I teach game development to Year 9 boys.
That's amazing.
And I actually have a lesson that I teach them all about accessibility in games, and I make them do a homework task all about it, which is
That's even more
really
amazing.
exciting for me. So one thing on the, for people who can't see, I saw in my homework task, one of my examples that I give my boys is that in my research for it, I found someone made a PhD project, I think, where they created an add-on for racing games so that people who are blind can play racing games by hearing where the walls are, which I just think is the coolest thing ever. So definitely look that up, because I think it wasn't a game itself, it was something that they could add to existing racing games to play racing games when they couldn't see the screen or anything. It's really, really cool. My comment is about, before Giselle, you mentioned your daughter who's 15 struggles with Xbox controllers, and that's something that I've always found as well as a lady person with small hands. And I just kind of wanted to see in the audience, if you consider yourself to have small hands, can you put your hand up? Okay, leave your hand up if you've struggled with Xbox controllers in the past. Okay, leave your hand up if you're female. Do you think Microsoft knows this about their controllers?
I think they do now. I don't know.
They're still retreating from
There's a reason Xbox Huge was a meme.
Well, that was it. They're trying to retreat back from their biggest mistake they ever made with that ginormous one that they came out, the Bellini one.
Yeah.
So they're, without sort of showing too much culpability, they're just creeping back from there. They'll get there eventually.
But yeah, there's a lot of things that are inaccessible. Mostly, you have that with VR. Although one of the examples is absolutely the opposite. There was a young RMIT student. I can't remember his name. He moved back overseas afterwards. He made this beautiful game that he showed at ACME, and it was flowers growing with like some movement thing. I can't remember. But he was about 5 foot tall. And so anyone else playing the game had to squat right down to get the flowers to start, because you hadn't built it, for once, hadn't built it for a 6 foot man. Yeah, so that was sort of the opposite of what is usually the case, where it's like, this is too big for my head, or it doesn't have enough variation in size to cover every head on this panel. Yeah, so it was kind of nice seeing it go the other way, where it's like this guy was too short for everyone to be able to play his game.
Can I just ask, do you teach in a boys' school? Or?
I do teach in a boys' school.
It's the right thing.
Yeah,
I
was my first thought as well.
I was thinking
Yes,
that.
there's only boys at the school, that's right.
Any more questions, comments? Yes?
Just so you're not too worried about making me run a long way, the enforcers have all got like a Fitbit challenge going on.
You can just keep doing that while you're waiting if you like now. I did 25,000 on Thursday.
Wow. So I'm Jen, and I'm totally blind, and this is more of a comment, so if it goes a bit wild, like punch me.
Not to say something.
But just to say a few things really, I really like the idea of playing games. I'm going to call them computer games, because I think the term video games is a bit problematic in that when there are really good audio games out there, a lot
That
of
is
sites
such a good point, my God, you just blew my mind.
But like a lot of my, I work in the tech industry as well, and a lot of my sites and colleagues, if they see audio game, they're like, oh wow, it's not going to be very good for me, it's not going to be very exciting for me. It's like a marketing problem really. And going back to the early, like let's say early 2000s, there was this brilliant audio game called Shades of Doom, and it was kind of like a cross between Doom and Abe's Odyssey. And this thing blew my mind, it was amazing, but I couldn't really talk about it, none of my site friends gave a shit basically. And I, as somebody that, works with a lot of gamers and wants to play games that aren't necessarily just tabletop. I love tabletop. I want to be able to play the same types of games as my friends and have the same discussions, and I definitely appreciate it. It's very hard to take what is essentially a very visual industry and make audio equivalences, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, even if it is like you get the audio version of this title, and okay, it's not exactly the same, because you obviously, you have to change the world to make it fit in that bandwidth space of auditoriness. But then I can have the same conversations with my friends, I'd understand the characters, we'd have the same stories, and that's really what I want. I want to be able to have the cooperative and the social elements, which don't get me wrong, all the games that were mentioned earlier are totally awesome. But I also want that social aspect, the community aspect, which is what I don't get at the moment. So I really hope the AAA folks will think about it, because there are loads of, audiogames.net, there's a whole site for it. There are loads of blind people, visually impaired people, or just people that don't want to play visual games. They want to give you money, take their money.
And they want to share our cultural conversations, and that is such an important thing to say. So thank you for sharing. You nearly sent me to tears over here.
Yeah, that was amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Start calling them computer games.
Computer games. They're computer games.
I'm sure I used to
now.
call them that.
Yeah,
like,
yes, they.
Yeah.
Oh, wow. Okay. Yeah. Oh.
Apologies that this isn't much of a question, but I saw a TED talk quite a while ago which was on a researcher that was using a haptic feedback vest in order to communicate information, and he could train someone who was deaf to hear people speak in about 8 hours. And I thought that was incredible, just absolutely amazing. And everyone talking about the fact that visual impairment is so difficult to get around, it made me wonder whether or not something of that nature, something as simple as a haptic feedback vest where vibrations of different amounts in different areas on the body could communicate what would be for everyone else visual cues. But I think it's pretty amazing that there is some research out there that is hopefully heading in the right direction.
Fantastic.
So if people want to look that up.
Taking all my notes.
In front of the camera.
So I'm just going to jump across to VR, which, as somebody on the spectrum, is amazingly helpful when I'm playing an FPS, because you'd be surprised how many times I want to do this, and you just can't.
Same.
For everyone in the audience, that was turning your head fully 90 degrees to the right.
And just, it's not a perfect system, but it could be of help to you, Josh. Island 459, it's basically what if Rambo in Jurassic Park, but their movement system is a point, and a sort of laser designator goes out to the point where you want to move to, release the button, and you teleport to that spot.
Wow.
Which saves you a lot of, you'd still have to sort of turn, but it saves you a lot of that spinning around on a spot, or trying to run sideways or back and forth, because you can just turn your head, point, click, and you're over there now.
Yeah. Cool. Yeah,
hopefully more games become like that.
Yeah.
Then I might actually buy one.
So I play EVE Online, which is a 16-year-old game now, and I've got a lot of macros and everything programmed on my keyboard just to help me, mostly because I'm lazy. But do you find that there's a lot of hardware and things like that help you come back to, say, older games that may not have had the accessibility sort of things thought of when they were early on in the gaming sort of industry?
All right. So, have any sort of older titles? Do you think of any retrofitted or?
Maybe not hardware specifically, but there are so many old games I would just ignore without modding communities, because modding communities not only put in, really cute anime girls with bright blue hair all the time, but some of them actually dedicate themselves to making older games more accessible by putting in modern accessibility features. So I was playing Morrowind for the first time a few years back, and I started completely vanilla, and then halfway through I sort of got to this point where my brain that gets distracted super easily and everything just couldn't handle all the information constantly being thrown at me. So I got mods that helped me better organize everything. I got mods that helped me change the UI to put things on maps and make it more sort of closer to modern Elder Scrolls games, just because cognitively I could not comprehend and focus on everything happening so much. So mods are good.
Yeah, right.
Not just software mods, but hardware mod guys too. There's people out there that do modify controls, but that costs money. And like seriously, what hardware or even software guys go out and actually hire these guys or girls to actually build them first up, because or even get them on board to be in the think tanks and stuff like that. It'll be a lot easier.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, we have got a clock counting down in front of us that is saying it is probably time to wrap up.
That's a really good follow-up one. Sure. I was just thinking about the audio version for like a AAA game. What would the God of War would it be like an audio book with interactive choices or something, or would it have some combat elements?
So I think it would be the story version. I think that's what it would be, and it would have to be you'd navigate.
Excuse me, can I just get the mic one more time to this gentleman? And
Yeah.
you can yell at me later for running late.
That's fine, you're getting your steps up.
When I yell at you, it means I'm trying to help
you.
It's
alright.
I've given a bit of thought to how you'd actually make a visual game accessible to someone who's blind, and do something similar to what they do with a lot of movies, subject to what the description is, and that can get you in trouble when you're a 14-year-old son. But I sort of thought of it more like a situation where you have like a sidekick or someone that was actually feeding information like in your ear, and sort of you have keys set up that say, okay, describe the environment, or if you're under attack, or direction, location, things like that.
Was anyone here yesterday when the intellectual property lawyers were here? You just said that idea out loud.
Yeah.
That's alright. You still have to make it, that's the hard thing. We are, I think, going to have to wrap up. Hopefully some of my panellists, are you available for 5-10 minutes?
Yeah,
We will hang around out there for a bit of a chat. Thank you so much for all your input. I really have an absolutely wonderful PAX.
I just run the front room and say that big.